When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
A couple great guests this week to tell you everything that Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is doing for the ducks at both ends of the flyway. Today we are joined by TRCP's Director of Private Lands Conservation, Aaron Field, and by the Director of the Center of Fisheries and Mississippi River Program, Chris Maculuso. Aaron coming to us from chilly Minnesota, and Chris in warmer and spicier Louisiana. They will detail all their great work for the ducks. And I do want to note that it is Aaron Field and not Fields, as Aaron connected with me earlier this week, noting that he thought his ancestors were too broke to own more than one field. So it can't be Fields, it's Field. I had a laugh and really thoroughly enjoyed that feedback from Aaron. If you haven't heard about TRCP before, here is your chance to hear how they've been growing and partnering with other organizations to help save habitat for hunters and anglers. That exclusive interview with TRCP and your duck migration forecast at the end of this episode, all this week on the FowlWeather Podcast. Aaron and Chris, welcome into the FowlWeather Podcast. Really excited to dive into your great work.
Thanks, Dr. Mike. We appreciate you having us. Really.
Yeah, great to be here. And thanks for putting out this great information for all the duck hunters out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think the weather could be any different between the two of you right now. I have been getting pounded with snow. My wife's about a half hour away at the office, and she's like, how bad is it? I'm like, well, it's been snowing since noon. I pretty much can't see halfway down the driveway, and I'm probably going to have to pull the tractor out to get going on that to get her home. But let's dive a bit into your season so far from kind of a hunting and fishing perspective. We're starting to freeze up for ducks here. We're starting to look at hard water for ice fishing. But I know Chris fishes a lot as well, other than his duck stuff. So I want to hear about that and how the duck migration's been going to South Louisiana so far. But let's start with Aaron, because he's in the midst of, I think, what is a full-blown freeze-out earlier than normal. So how is it, Aaron, and especially with the kind of lower duck numbers again this year?
Yeah, I'm up here in, I guess I'm right where it switches from west central Minnesota to northwest Minnesota. And that water's awful hard. You mentioned it switching over to ice fishing here pretty quick. I saw a guy out on my way to town yesterday, so a little more brave than I am. I don't usually like to throw a board across the open water to the ice to walk out to fish. But some people are a little more ambitious than me. Yeah, I mean, as far as the season went, pretty quiet on the duck hunting front, to be honest with you. It's one of those things, and I know you work on this a lot, is helping people hit the timing right. And up here, you know, it was warm until it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And that stretch where we kind of had that first push of birds through, guys I hunt with most of the time were smack dab in the middle of corn harvest. And so we spent a little more time trying to get work done than we did looking for ducks like a person ought to. But I had a nice couple hunts out in southeast North Dakota. Got into a pretty good batch of mallards and green-winged teal, a few gadwall and widgeons. Was lucky enough to have, I brought in a couple of scouting and permission asking ringers for that trip. So we got into a really nice field on that trip. And, but then, you know, I'm sure you were watching it. My season here ended just before Thanksgiving. That's right about the time it got cold and really dropped the temperature. And as usual, about the day after my season closed, we had a little push of mallards come through. I think I saw the nicest flock of mallards I'd seen all fall right after the season closed, as you might expect. But we've been doing a little better on the upland birds, rough grouse and pheasants. The big thing this season actually was my daughter's first year hunting deer, and she was able to bring home a doe during the early season. So real happy about that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. She must have been excited about that.
Oh yeah.
And that's always good to have. Was that like a pre-Thanksgiving type hunt, or where early, kind of when it was so warm for deer season for her?
Yeah. So our main rifle season is kind of right on the rut. And they do a youth season. It must be 2 weeks ahead of that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, I that was my expectation this year, is that you guys were definitely losing birds pretty quick. And I mean, I heard that Lake St. Clair's freezing up, and that's the big canvasback producer for us over here, and then Chesapeake Bay and further down the flyway. So I think people are seeing stuff that's different than normal. And we're gonna ask Chris here in a second, but like what I've seen, here's what's funny, is the FowlWeather Podcast, when people really want to know where are the ducks, we get huge listenership, right? Because they listen to the forecast and stuff. Social media has gotten really, really quiet because people are on social media when they don't shoot ducks, I've noticed. And they also listen to the podcast for the forecast of like trying to figure out where the ducks are at. But when they have ducks, they're like, whatever. We don't need, and this is one of those years. Some years we have to like talk about this all the way through January, but this year seems to be a year that they're moving. My one concern is that there's not a lot of ducks, and I think there's guys that do have ducks and folks that don't have ducks still, right? So there's going to be some spottiness about this. It's just duck hunting in general. But Chris, I want to hear, I do want to hear that Louisiana has ducks, is what I want to hear.
Ducks.
But if you don't, I mean, like we're full transparency over here at the podcast.
Look, so. I have no trouble being completely honest about whether we have ducks or not. And I think your notion or your observation about people complaining when they don't have birds versus I'm not hearing a lot of complaints. I can tell you, I have not pulled the trigger yet on ducks this year. I did take my son to make a nice little squirrel hunt a few weeks ago, and have a deer hunt planned here in the next couple of weeks. And I will go out and shoot some speckle bellies and some mallards and things like that, and some gadwalls coming up. But I can tell you, I've been in the marsh, probably 4 or 5 times in the last month, around Lake Pontchartrain and areas east of the Mississippi River, and we have ducks. I mean, it's impressive, and I think the flyover counts that the transects in the reports that we're getting out of our Department of Wildlife Fisheries, Fish and Wildlife Service down here indicate that as well. They're counting, 2 to 3 times more birds in November in Louisiana than they did the 2 previous years. And I really don't have a good answer as to why that is, other than we've got snow on the ground in Missouri and Iowa and parts of Arkansas already. And that's not something that happened until late December, early January of last year. I've talked to the guys I know in Arkansas and Tennessee. They've got birds. And I think something that's kind of cool is, we still have summertime ducks around here. We still have tree ducks. We still have what we call Mexican squealers down here, but we still have whistling ducks, which usually are gone when the cold weather comes. But we're still seeing guys being able to take those, in addition to the big flocks of green wings that I've seen, the big flocks of gadwall. We've got enough puddle ducks around here right now where I don't think guys have even started hunting, looking for canvasbacks or scaup or, what we call dogries down here. But we got a lot of those too. I was in some of the open water areas like Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Bourne, some of those areas around New Orleans not too long ago. And there are, bluebills by the thousands and thousands and thousands on those open water bodies right now. So, I mean, I can tell you that just in my little redfish and bass fishing trips into the marsh, on the east side of the Mississippi River in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I'm seeing more ducks, substantially more ducks this year than I have the last couple.
And that's great because, like, I'm genuinely a marsh hunter, and I really do well on the back and forth in December. Like, we get a lot of, like, around Thanksgiving and a little bit after, it'll snow, like, 2 feet. Okay, unheard of to y'all, but it'll snow 2 feet. And then we get like 45 degrees in rain and it melts and the rivers come up and things flood and it's super flashy. And folks have heard this a lot. Like I hunt that stuff and I know it really well. And I can get in and like last year I was just smoking mallards and black ducks on flooded crops off the river and it was beautiful. But all the lake hunters and the river hunters were pissed because they didn't have any birds. The divers hadn't shown up. And we get really good redhead and canvasback flights. And then the mallards and black ducks kind of concentrate on those lakes for a while, and they didn't have that. But here's the thing. We've lived now at the farm in Jack's Reef for, I think we're on 14 years now. It could be 13. I lose track of time, right, where we're currently at in central New York. And this is the first year where I think the big water hunters with the opener of our season this Saturday, our late split, are going to do fantastic. And I don't have my stuff. Like I'm actually losing 39 days of my season. Right? Like when folks in the South are like, we didn't have a season. We only got 15 days or 30 days. I'm like, yeah, well, we get it too on the North End because we've been bet hedging for the warm, which has been going on for years. This variation back and forth is crazy. But I really am happy for where I'm at with this is like just somebody who loves duck hunting and loves the duck hunting community. I'm going to have good years in my method and I'm going to have bad years. Right? I've got so much equipment at the farm. I can't, like, I'm running out of spaces to put stuff. And I sold my boat, my big water boat, because I'm like, most years, like, I haven't needed it in 13 years. Like, I can shoot till the end of season most of the time. So this year, like, I'm calling in all my favors for Saturday right now to try to find a boat to get on.
What's happening here is, you know, I don't know exactly when this is going to come out, but here in the first week of December, we're finally getting rain. We really didn't get rain here in October and November. And so guys who had water, and it's not that we were in a drought. You know, we have been in the last, you know, we've been in prolonged droughts at times over the last 4 to 5 years. But we weren't in a bad drought. We just didn't get rain for 5 or 6 weeks, which is unusual here. Now we're getting it all at one time. And I'll tell you, my experience in South Louisiana with that is anywhere where you had shoots of grass coming up in dry fields, anywhere where you had a piece of property where you had ducks on a, you know, on an impoundment or, you know, a rice field, but they weren't, we don't get a lot of dry field hunting in Louisiana.
Right.
But now you're going to get 4 inches of sheet water over some of these fields that have been dry, and there are going to be birds coming out of the woodwork. Now, the guys who are used to having all the birds because they had water, they may not see the concentrated numbers, but if you've got an area, you know, that you weren't hunting because it didn't have water on it, well, we got 3 inches of rain last night. You know, you're going to have ducks on that now. And to me, those few days after you get a heavy rain in November, December, January, that can be some of the most incredible duck hunting you can experience of your life.
And that's how it was when I was in Mississippi. Is it wasn't like always the northern front stuff. It was kind of the warm up and that rain that came out of the like southwest and blew up on you, and then the ducks just like blew out of like everywhere to take advantage of it, and all of a sudden you had like new birds flying around that were naive as well. So there's really kind of like there's the big migration we talk about that pushes ducks south, but then there's like the local stuff where they really kind of mix around trying to find those food resources and take advantage of it. But I think the big thing I'm saying here too is like, Chris, you guys enjoy it, because you know, it's been many years since I think there's been birds, and people are going to listen to this and be like, we don't have any birds. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But the freeze line's pretty low down latitude wise. The snow line's pretty low. There's ducks that are further south than they've been. I mean, people can't be like, well, you know, ducks are still sitting in Missouri in the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. I'm like, yeah, there's spots of them for sure on rivers and things, but in general, stuff should be further south than it's been in the past. So please have fun with it. It's just like what I'm saying, like the big water hunters around here, and I'm not hunting, like fine. Like we each get our different, you know, years, and it keeps all the people across duck country happy at some point. That's kind of my comment. And I keep getting into this, like, man, these, like the year this year we're having used to be the traditional year. That's how it would happen. When I was a kid deer hunting, there was snow on the ground for Thanksgiving.
Sure.
That doesn't happen anymore. And so ducks aren't like in the South in abundance, at least mallards in that like Thanksgiving period early December. They're coming later than they used to. But this year, man, take advantage of it. If you got them, get after them. So,
Yep.
Anyhow, rolling on here. Man, I really think like TRCP, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, is becoming more of a household name. I've heard more and more about it over the years. But for our listeners, some of y'all might not be like overly familiar. So I think Chris was going to take this one. Give us kind of that like 1,000-foot level of mission of TRCP and, who y'all work with and where.
Sure. Well, the mission of the organization, our reason for existing is to work across the aisle with as many conservation and hunting and fishing advocacy groups as we can. And that would include, anyone from Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, BASS, Coastal Conservation, National Wild Turkey, Pheasants Forever, your household names, to some smaller, regional groups, to things like the Union Sportsmen's Alliance and even organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, sometimes, who we can partner with to get better habitat work done, in some parts of the country. I mean, our mission, the mission of our organization is to guarantee all Americans a quality place to hunt and fish. Mm-hmm. And the reason our organization was created, 20 plus years ago by a gentleman named Jim Range, who had spent a lot of time working on Capitol Hill, is that there was a growing frustration in that you had conservation organizations, sportsmen's groups, et cetera, who all wanted the same thing, but were kind of competing against each other instead of working together. And so, our organization really does make an effort to be extremely bipartisan, to be very science focused, but also to be mindful of the policies and, the cultural things that are happening in hunting and fishing and habitat policy and conservation. And we really do try to work with whoever we can, who's going to help us advance giving people that quality opportunity to hunt and fish. So, Aaron works in one of our policy centers. He does our private lands and agricultural work. As you mentioned before, I work on our fisheries work and also policy on the Mississippi River Basin. But we've also got staff that works on a whole bunch of other stuff. We've got staff that works on Western land access. We've got staff in Alaska that works on the issues there. We've got staff that focuses on scientific issues in the Southeast, like longleaf pine, et cetera. Water policy is a big part of what we work on. Like we've got a big focus on the Colorado River Basin. So we're spread a little bit across the country. I think we were much more of a household name in the Rocky Mountain region in the first probably 20 years of our existence. But since, because of Aaron's great work and because we've branched out, into other parts of the country, and because of who we partner with, I think folks are starting to get us to know us a little bit more in other places.
Yeah, and that's solid. And having Teddy Roosevelt's name on there is not problematic either. So sure. I'd like actually this is like a little organic thing that wasn't in the script, because I do send anybody that listens and wants to and might be interviewed by the FowlWeather Podcast. We do send a script that is actually approved by the folks, but sometimes they go a little sideways. So we have the Roosevelt Wildlife Station and Roosevelt Wildlife Collection at ESF, and it was like the only thing that had Teddy Roosevelt's name on it that he approved for like a super long time. So, and I can cut this if I have to, but do you guys know the history of like how you got to use, Theodore Roosevelt's name? Because that's like a thing that's not common out there. Like it's very restricted. The family holds it tight. So
yes. And that's how we got to use it. We asked his family.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And we're given it. And I'd be lying if I told you I knew that whole story, even though I think at this point, I've been there almost 13 years, which is the second or third longest that, anybody's worked for the organization. But I wasn't there when the organization was founded 20 plus years ago. So I don't know all the history, but I do know that, we were very conscious about understanding, how ubiquitous Theodore Roosevelt's name was among starting the conservation movement in this country. And in fact, one of the first, I think the second national wildlife refuge that was created was the Chandeleur Islands, which is right in my backyard here in Louisiana. And we've worked real hard to make sure that people understand Theodore Roosevelt's connection to that area and why it's so important to invest money in restoring it. And just a little sidebar there, a lot of people don't understand, like that's a very marine environment. It's a place where you get sea turtles and you get sharks and redfish and tarpon and things like that. But it's also a place where about 250,000 redhead ducks at times spend the winter, on those seagrass beds, et cetera. So, we're very proud of that name. We know folks recognize that as Teddy Roosevelt being the first, real champion of conservation in this country among a handful of other people. And we try to do right by his name, in working with as many people on this as we can.
It affects my daily work when I get up outside my podcast. So I'm putting up a little wall here. This is my other hat, right? So at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, we have the Roosevelt Wildlife Station. And I have a letter that says that I've been designated the Roosevelt waterfowl ecologist. And like everybody was like, the station's really been up, then down, then up, then down over the years. But it is one of the only things that Teddy Roosevelt specifically said he okayed it for the State University of New York way back, early 1900s to have his name on it. And to be then go through all the ranks of everything I've done to get there science-wise and work with students and all that and get that name, on my resume is beyond what I expected, right? But then where I'm going with this, though, is to have a whole entire organization with that name is an honor and something that you must wake up daily and then feel like you've got to carry that burden. It's almost like a burden of conservation effort forward, right? So, but
well, I don't feel particularly burdened by it. I mean, it's something I wake up every day thinking about anyway. But Aaron, how about you? I mean, do you feel people love the logo. I tell you what, I get a lot of comments about, when I wear the hats and the shirts, they love the logo, and it's got Teddy Roosevelt's face on it, so yeah, I mean, you've got there's a standard we certainly are conscious of having to uphold.
And this is the organic part of it, like not in the script. I think burden's the wrong comment. Like I get up most mornings at 4 a.m. Dog kind of gets me up because it's already my schedule. And then she gets on that schedule, jumps off the bed, wakes us up. And I'm like, what's my next task, man? What's my next task? And so it's like honoring the people from your past to put your best foot forward and do the best work you can on a daily basis, with the idea that there's these folks like Teddy Roosevelt that set a standard for us a long time ago. So not to belabor that too much, but I want to jump into your guys' roles too, if you're good with moving beyond the thumping the chest of Teddy Roosevelt. So Aaron, I want to hear about, the private land stuff you do and kind of how it works for the ducks through TRCP.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris did a good job explaining kind of how the organization is structured, where we work with this broad suite of partners across the hunt, fish, wildlife conservation space. And when you look at that broader group of organizations that we work with, there's a certain subset who self-select and say, hey, we're interested in ag conservation. We're interested in the Farm Bill, which is one of the major pieces of legislation that we work on, both as an organization and then within the Center for Private Lands. And so about not quite half of the organizations that we work with overall as formal partners have self-selected and said, hey, we want to be part of the Agriculture and Wildlife Working Group, which is the group that I try to bring together. And essentially what we're doing there is each of these organizations has expertise on their critter, on their ecosystem, or on a group of animals or fish. And so they have specific priorities or programs or practices, just things that they're trying to get done from an ag conservation space. And essentially what my job is to bring all those groups together, try to figure out how X group can help Y group get their priorities met, try to figure out where there's consensus among this broad suite of groups with all sorts of various priorities. And then I look at that through the lens of, all right, we're putting our organization's designed to guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. which of these things are going to really move the needle towards that. And then, like Chris said, we go out and we try to educate hunters and anglers so that they understand either why this issue is important to them or why we need their help calling for something to get done. We facilitate the conversations among this broad suite of groups so that everybody's pulling in the same direction instead of not pulling together, or even worse, pulling against each other. And then we communicate that to decision makers so that they understand, hey, this is really what the hunt fish community needs to see happen for this given policy or this given program. And like Chris mentioned, we do that regardless of somebody's party affiliation and regardless of where they are on the map on other issues. We're looking at it from a hunt fish perspective, and this is what we're trying to do, and we're happy to work with anybody who we can pull with on that.
Man, and I love that because it was like a week, maybe it was like a month ago now, actually. It feels like a week because my world kind of moves too fast sometimes. But I got a thing on social media. It was like, wow, this guy's from New York. What the hell does he know about duck hunting? And it was like, I just flipped out, somebody said something and I just tried to add a little bit of good information, right? Here's what's really going on. And I got some blowback and I'm like, man, come on. We're not that different, right? This is the comment in rural America. We're all in this together as hunters and anglers. So can we just please get the glue going for the most part? So Aaron, thanks for a little touch on that, private land stuff. We'll get back to you in a second about kind of some specifics about kind of the, the thick of what y'all do for maybe ducks in the prairie region. But I'm looking at Chris now to talk about, down in the Mississippi alluvial valley and stuff, kind of what your role is and what y'all are up to.
Well, it's very similar to what Aaron's doing. He's working with private landowners, and we do too here in the lower Mississippi River. There's a lot of crossover between what we're working on in the Mississippi River Basin. Obviously, there's just an enormous amount of agricultural effort up and down the Mississippi River and throughout that basin. But the real push along the Mississippi River is something that we recognize as organizations that we work with is it's a massive piece of property. It's the center 2/3 of the country, more or less. And, it's an area that encompasses about, the floodplain itself was, probably more than 3 million acres at one time. And because of industry and agricultural practices and levees and development and things like that, we've lost, 70 to 80% of that historic floodplain, in the last 140, 150 years. The idea there is not, we're not out there pounding our chests and saying, hey, we got to get that 80% back. We know that there's so much infrastructure that's been built up around, utilizing the resources of the Mississippi River. But the question is, what parts of it can we get back? How can we make good waterfowl and fisheries habitat work within the industries that are along the river, within the levee systems that are designed to protect our communities, within the efforts to move floodwaters, more efficiently to the Gulf of Mexico. The navigation community obviously plays a huge role in this because they've got to get barge traffic up and down that river. And in the case of, the lower river, Mississippi River, you got to keep it dredged to a point where ocean going vessels can come in and out of that port. So we know that, the Mississippi River is incredibly important economically. It's incredibly culturally important. What we're trying to do is make sure with a group of partners like Ducks Unlimited, like BASS, like the American Sport Fishing Association, Delta Waterfowl, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, et cetera, that Mississippi River Basin, we're finding places where we can make reconnections to the floodplain, where we can have natural solutions like letting areas flood again and then letting them dewater naturally, where we can make those reconnections to not only benefit fish and wildlife habitat, but also the people who live in those areas. I mean, the fact is some of the levees associated with parts of the Mississippi River Basin, and sometimes we're not talking about the massive levee systems that are along the main stem, but even ones that have been built along some of the feeder channels throughout Iowa or Missouri or Tennessee, Arkansas, et cetera. Those areas have been straightened and levied as well. And those levees overtop sometimes, and that exacerbates flooding for some of those communities. It doesn't allow for like that natural floodplain creation where you get good spawning habitat for fish and natural wetland potholes and things that remain in order for waterfowl to use them. A lot of these rivers that are connected to the Mississippi River have were turned into drainage ditches, more or less, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And at the time, the idea was, well, we're going to protect communities, we're going to encourage agriculture, we're going to encourage commerce. But now we're getting to the point where we realize that those changes have had probably an overall detrimental impact. And so, how can we make some subtle changes in those areas to get them wilder again, to get them more productive for fish and wildlife habitat?
Yeah, we've disconnected the Mississippi River from its floodplain horrifically, I would say. And for lots of years, we just, we did it for flood abatement so we could farm it and we could cut trees and we could run the economy up and down the Mississippi River, which is important, as you know, right? And now we've got to find a way to bridge that gap and say, okay, we also have recognized that the environment in this matters as well. And so how can we make some of that connectivity where we can, where it can make a difference for ducks and for wildlife in general, and fisheries too, because a lot of this stuff, these fish need to come up out of that river into that floodplain and do their spawning stuff as well, and then go back into the river. So this is both, hunting and fishing type stuff. But where can we do it? We produced a moist soil wetland plant book. I get no royalties from this book whatsoever. All funds from this book go to the Kennedy Chair for Wetland Conservation and Management, Mississippi State University. So this is a moist soil plant book, and at the forward of that, we note that the Mississippi River is kind of dead, right? Or at least the historic Mississippi River is gone, not dead, but gone. There's like 4,000 miles of levees and dams along the river that have just pushed it into its channel. And so that comes with consequences, which we didn't see before. And so, Chris, you have it's an uphill battle, but it's where can you identify these areas to improve habitat, to make more duck habitat, to make more wildlife habitat, to make more fish habitat that is also habitat for humans that are hunting and fishing communities. So I give you a lot of credit for that is, the Mississippi River Basin, if you look across the United States, it covers most of it, as you said. And so you're at the funnel of it. And there's a lot of competing interests there. So I give you credit for being where you're at and working for that, what had been for many years a forgotten entity and interest, which to some extent are the rural community people and the hunters and fishermen that or anglers that rely on that, kind of system. So.
Well, and there's other things that have happened too. And as you know, I'm at the bottom of the funnel here in Louisiana, and really the just the most severe habitat loss has happened here along our coast in the delta of that Mississippi River, where you've lost 2,000 acres of wetland, in the last century plus because of those levees, because of, carving up those wetlands due to commerce, because of saltwater intrusion. And while we still have good duck habitat here in this state, obviously, when you lose 2,000 square miles of prime wetland habitat like that, it can't help but have an impact on birds and wildlife and fish, and even the protection of your communities. And I'll point a couple of things out. Number one, in addition to the habitat loss, we've also introduced a lot of invasive species into this basin that have had detrimental impacts on fish and wildlife. But even the native habitat, the native wildlife. I wrote a story a few years ago for a local magazine about, mottled duck populations. Mottled ducks are one of the few native birds to the Gulf Coast, and their population has declined 50+% over the last 70 years, and that is entirely because of marsh loss. That's just
habitat loss entirely.
That is entirely habitat loss related, and those kind of things you start to take personally, because those are our birds. We're happy to share ducks with everybody throughout the Mississippi Flyway.
But don't take our model ducks.
But those are our birds, and it's a special thing to see those ducks. And in the areas where we have found natural connections back to the Mississippi River, where you do get those natural sediment deposits and you get those new wetlands forming in those mudflats, you see a lot of those ducks. But the areas where the habitat is really degraded, you just don't see them anymore.
In Walmart's Louisville, time was ticking away. Only a few nights left till the big holiday. But last-minute gifters had no need to worry. Walmart Express Delivery got their gifts in a hurry. From Nintendo to Nespresso and Lego flowers, they could check off their lists in as fast as an hour. All of Louisville, East, West, South, and North could order gifts up until 5 p.m. on December 24th. So this holiday, just do as the Who's do. With gift delivery this fast, they all gasped. From Walmart, who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
So jump into kind of the habitat work that you're doing that kind of helps duck hunters in that part of the world. You've talked about it already, but what is it specifically you guys are involved in to kind of save the Louisiana, Gulf Coast and the lower Miss in general? What are those specifics, Chris?
Well, we've done a lot of advocacy work for specific projects. It started even before the oil spill when we were advocating, when conservation organizations were really pushing for coastal restoration efforts in Louisiana. And, 30 years ago, you could have talked about those projects being, $50 million projects or $25 million projects. They weren't of the scale that we're looking at now. But because you had, hurricanes like Katrina and Rita, and because you've had persistent land loss, in the Mississippi River Delta for the last century plus, the longer you wait to build the projects, the more expensive they become, and the larger the need becomes. So our organization has worked to pass legislation that secures money to direct to those, to the habitat restoration projects, some of which directly build wetland through dredges. Some of them reconnect the Mississippi River through what are called diversions, where you're reconnecting that floodplain back to the river, punching a hole in the levee basically and putting a control gate so that you can get water movement into areas that don't have healthy water quality anymore, where the swamps are falling apart. You've had them taken over by invasive species like salvinia or water hyacinth and things like that. Getting water movement back into those areas makes those trees healthier, makes the fish populations healthier, encourages native vegetation growth, and recreates habitat, for both native wildlife and fish, and also migratory birds. One of the projects that I'm the most proud of is, as the crow flies, is only about 6 or 8 miles from where I duck hunted for most of my life, in an area called the Maurepas Swamp. And it's between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And it's an area where, it was so culturally important to people in my family and other families in this part of the state, in this part of the world. But it's an area that was disconnected from the Mississippi River. It used to be a floodplain of the river. It got disconnected. And the habitat quality for deer and ducks and fish has really slowly declined. Well, we pushed very hard to secure the money and the permitting needed with a group of other organizations to build a diversion into that swamp that's going to open in the next few years.
So then water, when the river comes up, it flows through?
Yes.
And then goes back into the river, or where does it go down the Atchafalaya, or where is it headed after that? I'm not familiar with the area, so I'm a little probably geographically challenged here. So
so that's a great question.
I did come up with Atchafalaya though, so you can give me that.
Well, and we're working on the Atchafalaya too, because it's got its own challenges. But
for sure,
the Atchafalaya River is west of the Atchafalaya Basin's west of the Mississippi River.
Certainly,
This area, the Maurepas Swamp, is east of the Mississippi River.
Very good. Thank you.
And for all the duck guys out there, if you watched Duckman 1, if you watched Phil Robertson and Warren Coco in the original Duckman VHS video that we all watched in the 1980s and 90s.
Just let me stop you. It's literally probably why I'm here with you today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That swamp, the Maurepas Swamp, is where that video was shot.
Really?
And it was, you can watch that. It was all greenheads and it was all gadwalls, which we call grays. It was those kinds of birds. And the habitat has declined so much in that area, and you've had so many invasive vegetation move in, you don't get birds like that in there anymore. And what we're hoping is, it's not a cheap endeavor. I mean, this project is going to wind up costing $500 million or more, because anytime you punch a hole in the Mississippi River levee and have to put a gate on it and have to dig a conveyance channel, it's expensive.
Yep.
Not only the direct cost, but all the bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through. But yeah, they're going to, the state of Louisiana right now is building a channel from the Mississippi River that's going to reconnect the river to that swamp. And there's going to be a gate on the river that can control the flow. It's not a ton of water. It's, 500 cubic feet per second to 1,000 cubic feet per second. It's not a large amount of water, but even that little bit of water going back into that swamp from the Mississippi River, full of oxygen, full of food, etc., is going to rejuvenate that area. And the cool thing is, over the last 30 years, that's become all more or less public property. I mean, it's a 50,000 acre state wildlife refuge that once we plug the Mississippi River back in, is going to be a great area to hunt again. It's going to be a better fishery. And man, I just brim with pride, because every time I got to drive to the New Orleans airport, or every time, and I've fished that area, I grew up hunting that area, but I get to look at it, and I get to look at the progress and see that our organization and others worked on this. And it may be one of those situations where this big fat, bald, gray-haired guy, I mean, I might
I'm with you. I'm with you
on that project,
man. If you can look down from heaven on that piece of property someday, and there's kids down in there, and parents with their kids duck hunting and fishing and chasing squirrels and bears, and I don't know if there's Louisiana black bears down there or not, but I'm guessing there are. If you can look down from that great place in the sky and see all that, man, I don't know. I could sleep easy on that one, right? Get up and work all day and sleep easy on that effort. So, hey, Chris, we got to move on to Aaron over here, talking about the frozen tundra right now up north, but your breeding habitat programs and stuff, thinking about the breeding grounds, and, I guess we didn't get into a lot of ag market stuff that does drive the landscape in the South too with Chris. We talked about that before, Chris. It was like, sugar canes replacing things. There's a lot of stuff going on in Louisiana too, beyond the river, that doesn't favor ducks, right? Like rice country's a little less than it used to be, but some of that stuff's going on in the prairies too, Aaron. So give us a feel for, the trends in the prairies and how TRCP on private lands is kind of trying to, help work with farm bill programs and incentivize stuff that helps ducks up north.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm over here right on the eastern edge, depending on which map you look at, they sometimes cut me off, but right over on the eastern edge of the prairie pothole region, which if you're a duck hunter and you haven't heard of the prairie pothole region, you need to rethink what you're listening to.
Solid.
Obviously a critical piece of the continent for duck production. And a lot of that happens on the Canadian side. I'll give them credit, but states like North and South Dakota, Western Minnesota, chunks of Montana and Iowa, super, super important for duck production. Also super important for crop production in this country. You look at a state like North Dakota, it's going to be top 5 in commodity production for about a dozen different commodities. Anyway, so one of the things that I think maybe people know, maybe they don't, but in the United States of America, the vast majority, if something good for conservation gets done on private land in this country, it's because that landowner chose to do it. Very rarely is it a law that told them that they had to. It's because they decided that they were going to do something right for wildlife. They decided they were going to create some habitat or improve some habitat or change their practice or avoid doing something detrimental in the first place. And so rather than being able to point out an individual project, and I could listen to Chris talk about projects down there that he's been working on for a long time, not just because he's got a better accent than me. But what we try to do is create and improve these programs that provide incentives for farmers and ranchers to create wildlife habitat on their properties. So I'm going to try to stay out of all the acronyms as much as I possibly can. But essentially, what a lot of people don't know, even if you do know that private landowners are generally making this choice, what you might not know is that the biggest investment that we make in this country in conservation, hands down, is our Farm Bill conservation programs, to the tune of billions of dollars. And that's a big number, I agree. And it's also one of the best investments I think we make as a country, is finding ways to make it easier for folks to make the right decisions for wildlife habitat on their property. And so that's things like in the prairie pothole region, it might be incorporating a small grain into your rotation. We've seen a tremendous expansion of corn acres up here, and broadly just a simplification of agricultural systems. And I'll go on a short tangent here just to illustrate that. A personal example, my wife's family milked cows when we got married. And that cow herd went down the road, it's probably been 15 years or more now. Well, when that cow herd goes down the road, you don't need pasture anymore, right? So there's more potential corn ground. You don't need to grow wheat for straw anymore, so you simplify your system again. You don't need alfalfa anymore because you don't need hay to feed those cows in the wintertime, so that simplifies the system again. And so something as simple as the cows going down the road greatly impacts the entire landscape in this part of the world. And that's more true here on the eastern side of the prairie pothole region than a little further west. Not a ton of dairy out there in the first place, but the same thing has happened further west as well, where we've got varieties of and markets for corn that didn't exist before. So then you get into a stretch, we're not in one right now, but when you get into a stretch where corn's worth a whole lot, it starts to look pretty attractive to find a way to, take that pasture and grow corn on it instead of cows, or figure out a way to make that wetland disappear, which is obviously not something that duck hunters want to see, is wetlands being lost up here in the breeding grounds. We've already lost over half of the wetlands in the prairie pothole region. We can't afford to lose any more. In fact, we need to put a few more on the landscape. And that's another thing that these programs can actually support, is literally putting a wetland on the ground, not to mention restoring one or just improving the ability of one to raise ducks. One of the things we've been working on recently is something I'm pretty proud of, that Delta Waterfowl and Ducks Unlimited are the real leaders on here. But what happened was recognize that shallow, ephemeral, temporary wetlands in the middle of a crop field are really important for growing puddle ducks in the springtime. So we could have, gone a different route and gone to Congress and say, hey, we want to build a bigger stick to beat farmers over the head with over these wetlands, right? Rather than doing that, our friends at Delta Waterfowl sat down with all the grower groups in the state of North Dakota, and they said, listen, we want to keep these wetlands on the landscape. What's it going to take for you to help us do that? Came up with an incentive-based program, voluntary incentive-based program that used existing Farm Bill authorities, and have had a tremendous amount of success enrolling farms into that program to keep that water on the landscape more effectively, to have a better plant community around those wetlands, especially in the wet years, and to grow more ducks. So, I can point to all the water quality benefits in the world, but we're also going to grow a lot more ducks on those.
Yeah, and that's where you mix modes a little bit, is that the water quality, the downstream, pollution stuff that's reduced also grows ducks upstream. And one of the things I think some guys don't realize, if you've been to the prairies, you field hunt, maybe you hunt like a big semi-permanent, permanent pothole, the fall sometimes up there is pretty dry. And unless it's a really, really wet year, like I lived up there and I shot ducks in, like ephemeral stuff that lasted the whole summer and dried down a little on the edges. and grew some great like moist soil weedy plants, and we shot ducks on them. But those aren't the typical years, right? Like the prairies get wet, ducks use those temporaries, and then they dry up very often by the fall. And so if you're not there in the spring, in early summer, you don't see that. Man, if you're a bird nut, you've got to go to the prairies in the spring. Like, quit just showing up in the fall to shoot stuff. Like, go there, go fishing. Find a place to go fish, and then drive around and bird peep, and do it like early, kind of in like late May, early June, I think, before, like, once the broods all hatch and they all start to hide. I remember midsummer living up there, and stuff just disappears. Like, you'd think there weren't ducks all of a sudden, right? Other than like a gadwall in the middle of a wetland. So
I don't want to sound like I work for the North Dakota Tourism Board, but spent a lot of time in that state. And so come up next year and visit the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library when it opens.
Cool. Tell us about that one. This is an impromptu, Aaron. So go.
Yeah. So forgive me if I get my dates wrong, but I believe the official opening is July 4th, 2026 for the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library out there in Medora, North Dakota.
Nice.
Which is way out west. It's actually, I did my master's work counting grass right around the north unit of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And so this will be between the two units of the park. The design on that facility is amazing. I think it really does its name justice. I think it's going to be a fascinating place to visit.
That's wonderful. Good stuff. But yeah, go in the summer too, and see the darn place, I think is what maybe not Louisiana, Chris, because it gets a little surly and and the air gets a little thick down your all's country, but so
it does. But I want to follow up real quick on something that Aaron said, and I think this is sort of an overall theme. I remember a few years ago, I made the mistake of getting on a Louisiana duck hunter Facebook page, just sort of track what some of the guys were talking about, and it wasn't a great duck hunting year. We've had a lot of very down years in the last decade or so.
Yep.
Especially compared to when I was in college and skipping class and shooting ducks, and going to LSU in my camo and that kind of stuff. Man, it just seemed like in the early 90s, in the late 90s, we had a lot of birds, and that tailed off significantly. I would say in the last decade, but I was kind of paying attention to what some of the guys were complaining about, and I made a comment to somebody that, look, guys, we've lost 2,000 square miles of wetlands, and we've had changes in agricultural practice and things like that, and somebody reasonable would look at that and say, we're just not going to keep birds here like we used to. And some of the comments are, oh man, you don't know what you're talking about. We still got plenty of swamp. Yeah, we do. Okay. But to Aaron's point, you got to have a lot of wetland to produce a lot of ducks. And you got to have a lot of wetland and a lot of native vegetation and food to hold ducks and to get them to migrate into an area and to get them to stay and to get them to be healthy enough to make that trip back north. And so that's a common theme between the lower parts of the Mississippi River Flyway and the Central Flyway and the upper parts. Like, yeah, we still have habitat out there. But if we want the good old days to come back to a certain extent, you got to get more of it, and you can watch a wetland degrade in Louisiana and see not only the productivity go down, but also the kind of birds that utilize it change significantly. When areas that used to be wetland, coastal wetland that were pockmarked with potholes and natural sloughs and trenasses like that, they used to hold puddle ducks. They would hold gadwalls and pintails and mallards to a certain extent and teal. Well, as those areas have become open water, it's changed. If you're lucky enough to still get ducks there, it's turned into scaup or canvasbacks or redheads or things like that utilize that more open water. You either adapt to that or you don't hunt anymore in a lot of places in Louisiana. But I think it speaks to the bigger picture that you got to have a lot of habitat to produce the kind of ducks that consistently give you good seasons. And that's common. That's true in the areas where they breed and grow up and the areas where they come to spend the winter and eat and get away from the cold.
Yeah. And you can't just go to that system and take, even if you do transition to hunting the diving ducks, maybe a lot of people just, phase out, but you can't just take, you got to give back to it. If you want to have some something that resembles what was your, early childhood hunting experience to a large degree. Put that preservation, restoration effort forward with these organizations. So that is a little bit of a plug for you guys, but that's just a comment to duck hunters in general. It's just don't go out there and take, right? You got to give back. You got to be part of this larger system, this community of waterfowl hunters across duck country USA. So, all right. So I think the coup de grace of questions and where we're headed with some of this, at least in my sense, is that, this is kind of a question for both of you, but one of the things we really strive for at the FowlWeather Podcast is getting that good information out to duck hunters. We're a science-based podcast that really works to kind of get the newest and shiniest information out to all these, what I call the great people across duck country, which damn it, they are. I've got a lot of feedback from you all over time, and I don't get many complaints, which is, good so far, but I like your hate mail too. It's always fun to respond to, but I've also noticed like TRCP's, your statement of values I looked up, right? The words bold, science-based. So bold, here's TRCP's statement of values, words that are in it. Bold, science-based, transparent, and collaborative. Those are noted. They're also very much kind of at the heart of the FowlWeather Podcast, right? So, like, how do you work with the hunting and angling community to communicate your mission, programs? It seems like there's just so much misinformation that flows out there, right? And so how do you combat that to ensure we're kind of conserving and acting in the best interests of fish and wildlife for hunters and anglers? So, Aaron, let's start with you at kind of the north end of the flyway, and we'll reach down to Chris in Cajun land down there.
Yeah, well, thanks for pointing that out. That statement that you brought up there, plus that mission we mentioned earlier, guaranteeing all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. That's why I work for this organization in the first place. I come from a science background myself. I was never going to make it as a researcher, but I did spend some time as a professor. And I'd say right now, if any of my former students were still listening, they're not going to anymore. But I'm sure as soon as I was on, they hopped off.
Stop.
In a previous life. But that science-based information is incredibly important to me personally. I would not do this kind of work if I had to play free and loose with the facts. Just me personally. Now, from an organizational and strategic perspective, there's a lot of other good reasons why a person wants to be committed to science and evidence-based actions, and that's partly because of your reputation. The folks that we're working with, we need to be able to work with people on both sides of the aisle. We need to be able to work with organizations that represent a broad suite of interests. And if we're viewed as a bad actor or a shady actor, we're not going to have those relationships anymore. And that's going to make us highly ineffective. The other piece is I can see where it might be tempting to try to get a little sensational about things or play off of people's outrage in the short go to try to make a policy change or to try to get your point across. That doesn't lead to very durable change, though. People recognize that pretty quickly, and you might be able to be successful through one presidential administration or another, or even for one 2-year Congress or another, but it isn't going to last after that. And so just personally and strategically, I think it's incredibly important that we work in that way. And I think it's super helpful to have resources like this podcast where you have somebody who is, I've listened to a few, and you're given citations for papers and things like that, so people can actually, double check what they're hearing, right? I just think it's really valuable to work in that way, and I think that's how we're going to be more effective.
So I want to follow that up because, and this goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, actually, like as a teenager, I don't know if you know this, but he wrote a paper called The Birds of the St. Regis Canoe Area, which is in the Adirondack Mountains. So he's from Oyster Bay, New York, like Long Island now. Obviously grew up in an affluent family, but spent the summers as a young kid, like hunting, fishing, and birding. This is one of the things that people don't realize about Theodore Roosevelt is that he was at the heart of it, like not just a killer, but somebody that like really saw the total environment, things you could shoot and eat and things that we didn't. And he wrote a scientific publication at the age of 19 called The Birds of the St. Regis Canoe Area from northern New York. And so I went to Paul Smith College for forestry in my first couple of years and still go back and ice fish in the St. Regis Canoe Area. So there is like some very deep rooted like science basis that continues to perpetuate itself through these organizations and through us as people that Theodore Roosevelt himself started. So for you guys to also be, you people, your organization to also be very science-based is ringing true with who Teddy Roosevelt was. And that is one of the things I think I deeply admire about where your organization has continued to go. So, Chris, additions to that? Aaron, very, very nice comment on the reason for, the science basis as we move forward and staying kind of even keeled, I think, on all of this stuff. So sorry, Chris.
Well, no, I appreciate, I'm not a scientist. I mean, I know we're trying to keep this PG, but I'm a BS artist. I mean, I'm an outdoor writer. I'm a PR guy. And it just so happened that I was incredibly fortunate, that my dad was an outdoor writer and that I grew up in duck blinds and on boats and just got to go on some of the most incredible outdoor experiences. And, I mean, if I wasn't talking about this, I'd probably be talking about college baseball or Lane Kiffin or something like that. But I prefer the direction I went with this. But the science is so incredibly important, and I really want people to understand that, listening to your state agencies and even sometimes the federal agencies is important. I know a lot of people throw their hands up and say, "Man, I'm frustrated. I don't want to deal with that. Follow the money," throw out whatever cliches you want.
For sure.
But you guys are evidence and our state agencies are evidence of this. Scientists who like to hunt and fish, who really love to hunt and fish, work for these state resource management agencies. So, it's not just an academic understanding. It's they're on the water, they're on the land, they're in the blind. They understand it from that perspective too. Now, sometimes they get hamstrung by the bureaucracies. Sometimes they get hamstrung by politicians. We understand that. But, work with those people when you get the opportunity as hunters and fishermen. Work with your state agency scientists. Help them gather information if they need it. Don't be combative, because you see a lot of anger and frustration taken out on those biologists when really they're just trying to figure out how to do their job better. So that's one thing. The other thing is don't automatically be dismissive of your lawmakers. TRCP focuses a lot, and other organizations too, Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, BASS, CCA, you name it. We focus a lot on trying to get the accurate information to the public about what's going to happen with a piece of legislation or what's potential with something like a Water Resources Development Act or a farm bill, etc. Pay attention to that stuff, and don't be afraid to go to a town hall meeting with your congressman or to pick up the phone or to visit your legislator and say, "Hey, this is a big priority for me," because I got news for you. The guys who want to drain those wetlands or who don't want the Mississippi River changed in some way, for instance, they're talking to their lawmakers. You need to do that too. And don't automatically just be callous and cavalier about it and say it doesn't matter. It does matter. I've seen it matter. And if it didn't matter, I don't think Aaron and I would be doing this. So
yeah, like when you get an action item email kind of thing of like right to your, those numbers of people that talk to those representatives, they matter, right?
It does.
And I've been guilty of that over the years of like, I'm like, oh, I do this thing. Like I already work in the field. Like I don't need to write letters. And like, no, like you, just because you hunt and you buy a license, or even if you're in the field as a scientist, doesn't mean you shouldn't push that kind of comment forward and make sure your voice is heard. Because if, as you said, if you don't, somebody else with a stronger interest in that area might, or feels like they have a stronger interest, might overwhelm you. So
sure.
Yeah. And those we rely on, pre-field action alerts that we put out. We take a lot of time to write those and make them as pretty as we possibly can. But honestly, picking up the phone and calling that congressional office is going to get us a lot more mileage. And I don't expect, the everyday duck hunter to know the ins and outs of all the programs and know the acronyms or the dollar amounts. And it's not necessarily important that you do. The fact that you called in and say, hey, listen, I live in your district. I care about hunting and fishing, or I'm a duck hunter and we need better wetland habitat. And I expect my representative to work towards making that happen. That's every bit as valuable as Chris or I knocking on their door.
Right.
Yeah, nailed it. Man, thanks a lot for being with us. Let our listeners know where they can find more information on Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and, how they can help you all out in your mission vision.
Aaron?
Yeah, go ahead and easiest place is to go to trcp.org and you'll find all sorts of information there, all sorts of opportunities to get connected. We already gave you one other task, which was trying to figure out a way to get yourself directly involved with your elected officials. And then I'll give you the third one. We're a partnership-based organization. We're only as effective as our partners are. And so if you're a duck hunter, Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl and countless other organizations out there who are, working on behalf of duck hunters, either on policy or directly on the ground with boots and shovels. Your support for them helps us out too.
Yeah. And our email addresses are there. If you go to our staff directory, you can get in touch with me, Aaron. You can call us all kinds of names or whatever you want to do. But, we're available, and if you need advice or to be pointed in the right direction about an issue that you're having or a question that you have about hunting and fishing policy or what happens at the federal or state level, please don't hesitate to email us.
Yeah. Go to Chris first though.
Yeah.
I but I kicked around, I chatted with you guys, and I've been, very much interested in TRCP for a while before we even did this interview. And as we started to talk about this, I just went on and I'm like, I dropped $100 as a donation to TRCP because you're doing good stuff for hunting and fishing. It's like duck stamps. I buy like 4, 5, 6 a year, right? Like, I don't know, you go out with your buddies for pizza and beer and you're dropping more than $25 for a duck stamp. And if you do it 4 times, it's $100. So what the heck, Yeah. It's just money and we're putting our money where our mouth is. So I encourage people to go ahead and do that as well as just engage with TRCP in general, in all the good work they're doing. But I do want to leave our listeners with this directly from TRCP's webpage because it really hits at home with me as a blue-collar kid that either hunted by permission or on public lands. Here it is. Loss of access to the places where we hunt and fish is one of the biggest threats to the future of conservation and our outdoor recreation opportunities. Americans' access to the outdoors is unparalleled in the world, but there are more competing demands on our natural resources than ever before. Sportsmen and sportswomen can't afford to get edged out. In order to guarantee quality places to hunt and fish, it is critical that we safeguard our country's public lands legacy and the programs that incentivize boosting habitat and opening access on private lands, and we face challenges on both fronts. Wow. And an amen to that. Thank you, Aaron and Chris. I'm sure this won't be the last we hear about TRCP or the last that we'll have you on the FowlWeather Podcast. Please have a wonderful rest of your season. And, I think Aaron's moving on to some hard water fishing. I think in Jack's Reef country here in central New York, we're going to be ice fishing before Christmas, which has never happened in the 13 or 14, I can't decide which one we're at now, years we've lived at the farm. But winter is certainly here for many of us in the north. Chris, please have at our ducks because we don't have them. And thanks again, guys. Up next, our one and only duck migration forecast, and it's the only science-based duck migration forecast available. So, folks, stick with us. Aaron, Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Talk again soon.
How many days have you had empty skies over the duck blind? Your property can be more with Wildlife Strategies. It is no secret that hiring a consultant, an expert in managing water, woods, and fields, an expert in duck food, an expert in hunting pressure management, hiring a consultant yields better habitat for the critters you chase. Less empty skies, more quality days of field, more smiles for miles with family and friends. If that's your game and goal, contact Ryan Delaney at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
Abercrombie Kids is bringing the cheer all holiday season and the gifts too. No matter how long their wish list is, there's always room for just one more. Whether it's a new winter coat, an extra pair of jeans, or cozy matching sweat sets, get gifting with looks they've been waiting for all year. Shop Abercrombie Kids in the app, online, and in stores.
The Farmland Group is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisal across Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and growing. Contact them today at farmlg.com. Hey, I'm telling you, do not hesitate because these folks are busy buying, selling, and providing consulting and management strategies that build value into your portfolio and your land. So get in the queue today. Get on their radar. Get on their books. Man, y'all won't be disappointed. Contact the Farmland Group today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. And here we go into the migration forecast for the week. And let's just kind of lump the central Mississippi and Atlantic flyways this week together because the conditions are really similar in general regarding temperatures, snow, and wind directions throughout the week. Early in the week, we don't predict major movements of mallards, but on Friday and Sunday during the day, we predict a strong movement of mallards. And yes, I said during the day. So I'd expect to see some bunches of high-flying mallards on Friday and Sunday working into large wetland complexes into the Missouri latitude and some into points farther south. As the freeze continues in the North Country and down into the mid-latitudes, expect mallards on the move after the accumulation of cold and snow that is ongoing from northeast Montana on about a 45-degree line right through over to the East Coast at the southern border of Virginia. In the Central Flyway and lesser so in the Mississippi Flyway, we predict a good movement of mallards on the same day as those mallards moving. A new batch of pintails are predicted to show up in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana by the weekend and continuing into the weekend. In the east, the latitude of North Carolina should pick up some pintails, but also lose some to areas farther south. Overall, though, it should be a net gain of pintails at the latitude of North Carolina for this week. For gadwall, overall, we are going with a trickle of gadwall all week in all flyways as bigger lakes where they're feeding on aquatic vegetation continues to freeze out. So some dumb new gadwall should fall down south this week in front of your blinds across duck country USA, but nothing in giant bunches or big wads, probably small bunches, nothing more than a whack of gadwall. Yeah, and by the way, if you haven't heard the term whack of ducks, it is 16 ducks plus or minus 4 on either side. So nothing bigger than a whack of dumb gadwall in most places, but still naive dumb gadwall hot from the north. Shoveler, widgeon, and green-winged teal are really looking at getting into their wintering areas faster and faster, but this week will be a press even farther south than they're at right now. Again, the best bet is Friday and through the weekend, but also especially Sunday for new shoveler, widgeon, and green-winged teal into the south. For the Pacific Flyway, Friday looks like the best migration day overall, but not for mallards. pintail, or gadwall. This will be a widgeon, green-winged teal kind of week overall for migration in the west. So probably it really looks like a weekend warrior week with most movement happening starting on Friday across duck country, USA. Unfortunately, the dry La Nina conditions are really setting up in the southeast U.S., and that is likely going to affect the rest of your duck season in the lower Miss and Atlantic flyways, kind of south of Virginia to the Missouri latitude, and then down into the Gulf Coast of Texas. We have some kind of warm-up coming midweek, which, if it was also coupled with a good rain system, might redistribute some ducks from the coastal areas of Louisiana. But given the dry, it is unlikely that many ducks will blast back out of the coast into places farther north. If you are waiting on natural water in the southeast U.S., don't. It isn't coming anytime soon. Permanent and pumped water is going to be important this year. That's it, folks. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.